ignorant, lying bastard. Piece of shit. He doesn't know. Not my words, ladies and gentlemen. The words of this woman sitting right here. It's a window into what her thoughts, what she was thinking, what she was doing. She intercepted phone calls and kept them for herself, took them home, ridiculed and mocked people. None of it was for public business. None of it public purpose. It was for Kimberle Weeks sitting right over there to have a collection. What she did with that collection, I'll leave that for you to decide. Mr. Kulik said one thing that we agreed with, one thing in his whole closing argument, that we disagree about the law, and that's absolutely certain, ladies and gentlemen. The defense takes one position on the law. I'm going to explain to you how what they've explained to you just doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with what makes sense. And here's the most important thing. Your job is to rely on common sense. You came in that door with common sense, you're going to go through that door with common sense. And when you put your common sense together, you will see in this situation that Kimberle Weeks broke the law. Let's begin with a public meeting. The judge is not going to define that for you. You, as common sense jurors, are going to get to figure out what that is. Suggestions for you to consider. Was the meeting open for the public to attend? Was there anybody in the public attending the meetings? Was it an advertised meeting? Was there notice to the public? Was there any press in any of these meetings? I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, it's for you to decide whether or not these were public meetings, but by any stretch of any imagination, none of them would ever qualify as what one would see as a public meeting. Would a conversation between Jerry Hammond and Kimberle Weeks be considered a public meeting? Was there anybody else in public there? Was it held at a gymnasium at a school for someone to attend? Was a conversation between Whitney Anderson and this defendant a public meeting? Think about that. Was anybody else there? Was it held in an open location? Was it advertised? None of that. It was a return of a phone call to this defendant sitting right here. Virginia Smith, she's in her office. She speaks with Kimberle Weeks, the defendant. Is that a public meeting? Does that make any sense that that's a public meeting? Was there any public there? Was there anyone else present? Was it advertised? Was it the press there? None of those things qualify, ladies and gentlemen. Use your own judgment. You've lived lives you've seen. You've been to school board meetings, county commission meetings, city meetings. I submit to you those are public meetings. You make your decision. Use your common sense what a public meeting is, ladies and gentlemen. And I submit to you that the defendant right over here knew that that meeting with the Secretary of State was not a public meeting. Because remember what she did? She asked for permission to record it. Why would she ask for permission to record it if it's a public meeting and she has the right to record it? That makes absolutely no sense. It's illogical. If it was a public meeting, she was a public servant since 2008. Think these things through, ladies and gentlemen. You listen to that tape that occurred after where she distributed or published it. At any point on that did she say, oh, that was a public meeting I had with them? No, she referenced it, a conversation with them. Use these things when you deliberate and think. Use your common sense. I'm not asking you to, the law is a little comprehensive. But when 6 folks with good common sense sit down and they look through it, you're going to be able to see what it means. The defense has argued that it's not a wire intercept. There's 2 elements here that we have to prove, and the judge has instructed you that it was an intentionally intercepted or endeavored to intercept. So, was it an intentional interception? Well, I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind. Anybody sitting in this courtroom knows Kimberle Weeks is the person who recorded those conversations. And how do we know that? Well, they were on her phone, right? Secondly, who is the only common denominator in every one of those conversations? Anybody else? No, it's Kimberle Weeks. Oh, and we have Darlene Walker who told you. She watched her record one of those phone calls. These are factors you get to consider. And the defendants went to great lengths to say, Shannon Brown, why would the state even do that? The purpose of that is not what Shannon Brown said or what it was, but to show that she intentionally recorded. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that first element that we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, I would even say it's beyond any doubt. You can check that one off when you go back there. There's no question about it. We got to move on to another topic, which the defense touched on. And their claim is that public offices are public for everyone. If you are the President of the United States, according to their argument, anybody, myself, I can just wander into the White House, throw my shoes off, jump on the couch, and hang out in the Oval Office. Does that make any sense? Does that really make sense that anybody can just walk into any public employee's office and it's open to the public? Yes, it's owned by the public. Yes, it's public property, but that doesn't mean it's open for the public to go there whenever they want. Can anyone just go into a judge's chambers and hang out? No. You got to use your common sense, ladies and gentlemen. If you've had a job before and you've had an office in your job, that is your office while you occupy that position. You have an expectation that that is yours and others are not going to come in and infringe on it. Use your common sense. That argument is just ridiculous to say that it's a public office and anyone can come in. I mean, if you follow that little argument, I could come here this weekend and I'm just going to take this TV screen, it's a public TV screen, I live in town, I'm going to take it home with me, put it in my pocket. Does that make any sense? Think about it, ladies and gentlemen. We're using our common sense. There's only two elements here. The first one, I'm telling you, you can go back there, you're going to have no doubt about it. It's that first element of intentionally intercepted. Where the issue is and the disagreement between the state and the defense, and it's for you to rectify, is whether or not it was a wire communication. That's where the whole crux of everything comes down to. Was it a wire communication? So first and foremost, the defense said that the jury instructions are just so confusing and that the state should have brought an expert to clarify what a wire communication is. Well, it says an oral transfer, and then it defines an oral transfer. Transfer containing human voice. I think 6 jurors, 7 jurors.
Excuse me, Judge, I want to object to this exhibit. It's missing a sentence in the middle.
And that's not what you're trying out right now anyway, Mr. Prosecutor. Turn off the screen for the time being.
Can you tell me where it was?
You said that the wire transfer contains a
Yes, ma'am.
voice.
Thank you. The defense thinks that you guys are unable to determine what a human voice is, or figure out the origin and where it ends up. I submit to you, common sense, you can determine, was this a wire intercept? Was it a human voice that was one location to another and then intercepted by this individual? It's that simple. I submit you guys will easily be able to determine that. The question now becomes whether or not let's talk about the second end of this first, then we'll come back. I'm sorry. Exhibiting an expectation that such communication is not subject to interception under circumstances justifying the expectation. So let's talk about that. The defense harped a lot on circumstances justifying such expectation, and they have decided that because of that, every public information discussed there's no expectation of them. You have no expectation in any of that stuff. I submit to you, if you apply your common sense to those words and meanings, what the legislature mean by that is a situation, I go to Panera Bread. I take my cell phone out. I go on speakerphone in front of 150 people and have a conversation. That is a situation, circumstances justifying such expectation. I don't have an expectation at that point because I've opened it up to everybody. I'd submit to you if you go to a football stadium and you go into the loudspeaker and you play your phone conversation of the loudspeaker, that is a circumstance justifying such expectation. A phone conversation between Kimberle Weeks and Virginia Smith is a circumstance that justifies such expectation that is protected, ladies and gentlemen. That is something that falls right under there. Think about it. If you follow the defense's, well, we'll come back to that in a sec, but the phone conversations between each of them are circumstances that justify that expectation. These are not situations where you're out in a situation where everyone can hear what you're saying, where everyone knows what you're saying. And think about what occurred in those situations. Virginia Smith goes into her private office, she closes the door, and she expects it's only her and Kimberle Weeks on the phone. Is that a circumstance justifying such expectation? Think about it. You folks are the one who are going to get to decide that. But I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, in society, that is certainly a situation that should be protected under there. What about a phone call between Jerry Hammond and the defendant? Whitney Anderson, same thing. Are those circumstances justifying such expectation? You better believe it, ladies and gentlemen. That is a situation where society is prepared to protect that. And that's for you to decide. You to make that decision. What's really interesting, and the defense did bring out, I left the last line out, not purposely, where it said, uttered at a public meeting, an oral at a public meeting. Let me read it specifically, I don't want to mislead anybody. But any public communication uttered at a public meeting. So think about this. The legislative intent was to protect public meetings. Not what the defense keeps saying. The defense keeps saying...
I'm going to object to what the legislative intent was for this one.
Includes the facts and evidence, Mr. Phillips.
I can argue with the law is based on what we're...
Legislative intent is not part of the record. You can argue the law and your interpretation.
Yes, ma'am. Reading the law, ladies and gentlemen, the law written by the legislature, not their intent, it's public communications uttered at a public meeting. They didn't say public communications uttered anytime you're a public official. Okay? And that's what the defense sitting right here wants you to read into it. They want you to think that anytime a public official communicates something, that's what is covered by the statute. And that's patently wrong, ladies and gentlemen. You read it, you decide for yourself. But I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, when you look at circumstances justifying such expectation, if the legislature had put in there all public communications, then it would be a different story. But they didn't, and they specifically put in public meeting in there. That's for you to decide what they meant by that. You make that decision. I submit to you, though, I submit to you to make your own decision on that. Let's talk about exhibiting an expectation, a person exhibiting an expectation that such communication is not subject to interception. Let's talk about what the defense wants you to believe that says. They want you to believe that anytime somebody gets a phone call, that only way to protect yourself is to immediately say, I do not want to be recorded. I do not want you recording what I'm saying. Does that make any logical sense? Does that make sense that there would be a law that would make you affirmatively say, don't tape me? How many of us have gotten on phone calls with customer service? What's the first thing it says? This call may be recorded to keep customer service, whatever their wording is, it's always different. Use that. Use your common sense. Think about that. They want you to parlay that into every phone conversation. Nobody has an expectation to be free from wire intercept unless you affirmatively say that on your own. I would submit to you when you read the law, and it's for you to decide, that there's an affirmative duty on the person who wants to record you to notify you. And then you can put your...
The court is going to instruct the jury on the law. He's trying to add laws again.
Judge, the law is silent to it. It doesn't say anything about that.
And it's his interpretation. And again, it's for the jury to follow the instructions given by the court, apply the facts to that law.
I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, when you look at the law in totality, the defense tried to underplay this, right? Mr. Cooley got up here, he's like, it's okay, but that's important. Your job is to look at everything together. When you look at that together, I submit to you that in order for someone on the phone to exhibit their expectation of privacy, they're not in your person. How the heck would they know you're recorded? The only way is if you notify them. I would submit to you that you have to notify them, and then they exhibit that expectation. Unless we have in Florida 20 million magicians and magical power folks who know what's going on the other side, I submit to you, it makes no sense to expect people immediately to pick up the phone and say, don't record me. Common sense. Use that when you make your decision, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about the Secretary of State reporting. That one fulfills every element. And you know what actually happened on that? That was the first recording of Ms. Weeks, right? That was April 3rd. Do you notice that the recording April 7th and the one in September, she didn't warn the people beforehand? Because she learned that they could object to her. Think of it chronologically what happened. But in the Secretary of State, she asks, can I record it? What does he say? No! No! I don't want you to. And the defense argues and they try to say Mr. Lebowski wasn't going to be on the phone. He was on the phone for 18 minutes. Now, if we were here at 18 minutes and 1 second and she had started recording then, maybe we'd have a different argument. But he was on the call and he said he could advise Lori Edwards. And what's more important is when he went to go tell Kimberle Weeks again, I don't think she interrupted him. And she said, okay, okay. She agreed not to record it, and guess what she did? She recorded it. The defense will argue that there's no circumstances justifying that expectation. Think of every day in public life, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine what would happen if every conversation, every phone call in public life was a public meeting or circumstances that wouldn't justify that. Think about that. You would have situations, according to the defense's theory, if I wanted to barge into the chambers of two judges when they were discussing public business, I can do that because those are not circumstances justifying expectation.
Judge, I object. It's a bad example. Judges are exempt from this.
Sustained. Jury's instructed not to consider the last statement and it will be stricken.
Child protective workers. Two of them working on a case. Or even better, someone who's at work, you have a manager and they're hiring some people. They're discussing the hiring of people. And there's some negative things. Or they're discussing when they discipline people. I can't just barge in there and make myself part of that meeting. There's business that goes on every day. If that was the policy and the procedure, this place would slow to a grinding halt. Use your common sense. You guys have life experience. Weigh that when you make that decision. But I submit to you, the Secretary of State's phone conversation, it was a phone call that was not supposed to be recorded. There was no circumstances, justifying the expectation, and the Secretary exhibited that. Not just the Secretary, but Gary got up here. Mr. Holland, what did he tell you? He, based on the Secretary objected, expected it wouldn't be recorded. He had that expectation because also Ms. Weeks said she wouldn't record. Same thing with Gary Lebowski. He thought she wasn't going to record, so I expect it won't be recorded. All of those people had that expectation. Was that a public meeting, ladies and gentlemen? Was there one person from the public there? Was it housed in a gymnasium or a library? Was it noticed to the public for people to attend? The Secretary told you that was not a public meeting. Gary Holland told you it wasn't a public meeting. Even Ms. Weeks herself knew it wasn't a public meeting, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't qualify. The state has proven that beyond a reasonable doubt, and you need to find her guilty of that. And that leads to count 7, the distribution or publishing of that. Let's talk about that. The defense really downplayed that 5.5-minute clip. They said, well, I don't know what it even means. I can't. Look, a 10-year-old child could listen to that phone conversation and would know exactly what happened. There is a million context clues in that phone conversation, or it's actually not a phone conversation, it's an in-person conversation. There's millions of context clues that will point you exactly to what happened. The first one was, who's that guy? Secretary of State. And then she references the other woman in there, not Ms. Weeks. The other woman references and says, is he going to write a letter for you? These people listen to that phone call. There's no question, there's no doubt, there's no nothing. And to argue that no one could see that from there, that is just outrageous, ladies and gentlemen. Use your common sense, Review it yourself if you need to. It's 5.5 minutes. You'll review it and you'll see in the first minute